Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about Governor J.B. Pritzker's proposed spending plan, the taxpayer cost of caring for non-citizen migrants, and where the governor's looking to get more tax revenue. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. Republican state lawmakers are decrying Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's $52.7 billion budget proposal that looks to raise nearly $1 billion in new taxes in an effort to offset projected deficits. During his State of the State and budget address Wednesday, Pritzker said he plans to include a child tax credit, among other things.
So there's one more thing that we ought to do. For the good of our state's working families, let's permanently eliminate the grocery tax.
Republican State Senator Chapin Rose said eliminating the 1% grocery tax doesn't offset inflation and doesn't impact other high costs for Illinois taxpayers.
College kids, taking it out on them. Seniors, where's their prescription drug tax relief? There isn't any. Property tax relief for working families, where's that? Nowhere to be found.
The Illinois Chamber of Commerce said it's disappointed in the governor's proposal to cap business operating losses and reduce the sales tax retailers' discount, calling it a stealth tax increase on retailers. Illinois lawmakers are reacting to the governor's State of the State address Wednesday, which included asking taxpayers to pay more for the care of migrants. Kevin Bessler has that story.
Governor J.B. Pritzker's budget proposal calls for more than $180 million in funding to help deal with the crisis. The governor also blasted Texas Governor Greg Abbott for busing migrants to Illinois. But State Representative Blaine Wilhauer says Pritzker himself is to blame.
You can't literally invite people to come here with this insane sanctuary state policy and then complain that we don't have the resources when they arrive.
State Senator Terry Bryan says the migrant funding could be better used elsewhere.
We know for sure that there's going to be new budget money that will go to the welcome centers, all while our people, our citizens here, are trying to figure out how they're going to pay for eggs and groceries.
Pritzker said in his address that we didn't ask for this manufactured crisis, but we must deal with it all the same. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Are you tired of news that puts politics over people? At the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation, we believe in putting people over politics by delivering nonpartisan news and audio content that serves you, the American taxpayer. With Franklin News Foundation, you can read fact-based, state-focused news for free at thecentersquare.com. You can listen to civil, balanced conversations between policy experts through our podcast network at americastalking.com. Or you can get in-depth news on K-12 education spending, curriculum, and school safety at chalkboardnews.com. It's all free through Franklin, where we put you, the American taxpayer, first in every story, episode, and conversation. and it's only possible through our supporters. Together, we can produce content that puts people over politics and brings Americans the news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate. Once again, that's franklinnews.org/donate.
Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, February 22nd. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker delivered his combined State of the State and budget address Wednesday. The budget proposal that Pritzker sent to the legislature includes almost $1 billion in tax increases, more funding for the migrant crisis that Chicago and the rest of the state face, the transfer of some medical debt to taxpayers, and so much more. There's a lot to unpack here, and joining me to help do that is Greg Bishop, the Center Square's Illinois Capitol Bureau's senior reporter and editor. How are you, Greg?
Dan, after a busy week of the legislature being in session and the pinnacle of the week being the governor's budget address, they're off next week. So I think heading into the weekend, a little bit of a respite before we get into full legislative session.
Well, as much as there was in Governor Pritzker's budget proposal, Greg, I'm sure you'll have plenty to write about following up on that. Why don't we start with the overall cost of the proposed spending plan, Greg, which is $52.7 billion. That would be a 2% increase over the current fiscal year budget. Keeps going up.
Yeah, and just to put even more context on this, when the governor first came into office in 2018, the budget spent $40 billion. So you're going from $40 billion just 5-6 years ago to now $52.7 billion.
Wow.
Now, the governor's office, of course, says that that's what's being spent. They're expecting $53 billion in state taxpayer money. And they are estimating a $300 million surplus for the fiscal year that starts July 1st. So with the State House in session, the chief thing they have to take care of is the state budgets, to make sure that they have a spending plan in place for the fiscal year that starts July 1st. This budget proposal is the most expensive taxpayer spending plan in the state of Illinois history. And with it, you had projections of a nearly $900 million deficit going into the budget address. But the governor's planned budget apparently has $900 million of various tax increases. So we can go into that in some more detail, but clearly it's the most expensive budget. It spends more on migrant care. It spends more on migrant health care. It spends more on a variety of new programs that the governor is bringing about. We've got the Smart Start program, early childhood education. That's getting a funding boost after the first year. In the current year, spent $250 million. He's looking to increase that to $400 million. You've also got increased costs for the grocery initiative, where he's sending tax dollars by way of grants to various places that may have food deserts to help prop up grocery stores. But he also, in his budget, he says he's going to bring about a child tax credit. We've heard a lot about this. Actually, a couple of different proposals at the State House would bring about different levels of a child tax credit, but the governor is wanting to make that part of his spending plan. Also, he's looking to reduce the state's grocery tax, that 1% grocery tax. He's wanting to eliminate that permanently. If you recall, Dan, a couple of years ago, that was part of a package he had that included freezing the gas tax increase and also suspending the grocery tax. That was just a temporary suspension, but now he's wanting to essentially do away with it entirely. I talked with the Illinois Municipal League about that, and they have problems there because a lot of that goes to the municipalities. So there's a lot of impact in various sectors across the board of the governor's proposed plan. But again, going into it, we thought we'd hear about a $900 million budget deficit. But the plan apparently includes around $900 million of revenue increases, meaning taxpayer dollars going into the state's coffers for the coming year.
Let's go into the specifics of the tax increases, Greg. We'll talk about a few specific things related to the budget proposal here. But the $900 million in tax increases, where is that coming from? Who's going to pay for that, assuming the legislature passes it?
So the biggest chunk of that is an estimated $526 million, and that is from capping the net operating loss deduction for businesses. Again, at a cost of $526 million of increased tax revenue for the state of Illinois. The Illinois Chamber of Commerce quickly put out a statement saying they're disappointed in that proposal. They said the cap is nothing more than forced borrowing of funds from Illinois businesses to finance government. So that's one element of that $900 million, the biggest chunk being $526 million. You also have a cap on the sales tax that retailers have a discount for. So this is interesting, Dan. You hear about this from time to time being threatened, as the Retailers Association may say. So retailers, they act as sales tax collectors. And when you go to the store, you buy an item, it has a sales tax associated with it. It's not like there's a government agent standing right there saying, give me the sales tax. It's the retailers that have actually acted as the sales tax collectors. So they have to have the infrastructure in place to not only assess that tax on the sale of the products, including all the different types of levels of sales taxes there may be, like for groceries or for tobacco or for alcohol or for milk or whatever the case may be. But they have to have the infrastructure to calculate that tax. They have to have the means to collect that tax, and the retailers have to then hold that tax and remit it back to the state and local governments. So for all of that work, retailers typically get a sales tax retailer's discount as part of their taxing. But the governor's wanting to cap that, and he's wanting to cap that as a way to bring in $101 million. And that could lead to more problems with retailers. They quickly fired back and said that the governor's proposal would hurt retailers that are already struggling with high labor costs, with high costs for goods, and a razor-thin operating margin. So clearly that's another area where the governor's looking to get more revenue to plug a deficit. But those impacted by it obviously concerned, let alone the concern that it could raise for consumers who are going to buy these products. Are they going to possibly see an increase because the retailers aren't getting that discount? So again, that's $101 million estimated.
Let me just jump in here, Greg. And of course, if retailers do pass that cost on to consumers, which many would expect, that's going to be on top of the elevated inflation we've all seen over the last few years. So consumers and businesses are getting hit by these first two tax proposals. What about the third one, Greg?
Well, and there's several here. Another one, and I'll have to delve a little bit deeper into this, but it would ultimately bring about changes to what people can do for their income tax deduction. It would make an adjustment to the individual income tax standard deduction. That's estimated to bring in about $93 million. But another one, Dan, that seems to be more of a kind of targeted tax. I don't know about you, but I do not bet on sports.
I do not either.
But sports betting is a huge industry in the state of Illinois, and there's a tax on it. And the governor's looking to, I believe, double the state's tax on sports betting. And that's estimated to bring in around $200 million. So all of these combined with a variety of other possible proposals, and again, these are all just proposals from the governor as part of his budget address. All of that combined, about $900 million in tax increases as part of the governor's spending plan.
Of course, Illinoisans already pay among the highest state and local taxes in the country with the property taxes. Illinois usually ranks somewhere around second highest in the nation, behind only New Jersey. Sales taxes are high, particularly if you live in Chicago and certain suburbs that add their own local sales tax on top of that. Well, Greg, why don't we get into some specifics of the spending plan?
Well, if I could just briefly, State Senator Chapin Rose, he fired back and said the elimination of the 1% grocery tax does not offset inflation. And then he said that you've got seniors with prescription drugs. Do they get any tax relief? No, he says there isn't any. He also said property tax relief for working families. Where's that? Nowhere to be found. So clearly there's a lot of contention in the governor's tax and spend proposal from his budget address.
Right. Thank you for that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the spending that Pritzker is proposing. We've talked on Illinois in Focus, and we've written at thecentersquare.com about the ongoing migrant crisis that Chicago and really the entire state faces. That's not going anywhere soon. Pritzker did in his include in his budget additional spending for services for the foreign nationals who have been bused to the state, who have arrived in the state. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so far, taxpayers, both in Chicago and in the states, they have spent around $500 million on caring for migrants. This does not include the taxpayer-subsidized health care benefits that migrants over the age of 42 receive. So already spending more than $500 million, and that's since the crisis started in August of 2022. Well, the governor, he's looking to increase funding yet again into the next fiscal year. He wants to spend $182 million more dollars from state tax dollars to help pay for these non-citizen migrants. And that's going to be for a variety of things, from wraparound services to even getting lawyers to help with their asylum claims and housing. So an additional $182 million. But one analysis I saw also includes the increase for the subsidies for undocumented health care coverage. And if you recall, in the previous budget, there was around $550 million that was budgeted. And the governor said that he's going to implement some co-pays and things to help save taxpayers money on that increasing cost, because it was estimated to be close to $1 billion, if not more, in taxpayer costs. So the state's like, we got to get control of this. So as that plays out, now the governor's office is looking at increasing that from $550 million to $629 million for the health care of non-citizen migrants in the state of Illinois. So all of that combined, you've got migrant funding taking up around $811 million of state tax dollars in the new fiscal year that starts July 1st.
Greg, you mentioned this earlier too. What's this medical debt relief program about?
Yeah, and the governor, he talked about how his priorities are focused on working families and making sure that they're not burdened by high cost for things. And he talked about the child tax credits being good for working families. But he also talked about medical debt and how he wants to retire medical debt for thousands of Illinoisans. And in a way, it's kind of a pilot program. He's going to allocate $10 million that he says will help pay off $1 billion of medical debt in the next year budget. And he says that's going to impact thousands of Illinoisans with medical debt, and they're going to contract with a third-party company that apparently handles these types of medical debt retirements. And he says in his speech, they're going to get it for pennies on the dollar. And that's why he says allocating $10 million for this particular initiative will help alleviate the medical debt for around $1 billion worth. So we'll be watching that closely to see exactly what the company that's getting this contract's doing, how much that contract's costing, and how exactly are they able to get pennies on the dollar for retiring medical debt.
I was going to say, Greg, I don't know how that math works. But I'm certainly no mathematician or accountant or whatever, so I look forward to seeing our continued coverage on these various proposals. Not included in his budget address, Greg, but another tax issue that could affect taxpayers. The owner of the Chicago White Sox was in Springfield in advance of the budget address this week, meeting with key lawmakers, including House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch. He's looking to build a new White Sox stadium in the South Loop, and he's asking for taxpayer funds too. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Jerry Reinsdorf, he is approaching 90 years old, and members of the media got word that he was going to be on the Capitol grounds, going from various leaders' offices to talk about his plans to build a new ballpark in the South Loop of Chicago. And nothing like a good stakeout, Dan. I think I waited outside of House Minority Leader Tony McCombie's office for a good hour and a half, waiting to see Jerry Reinsdorf appear. And he came and sat down with McCombie for about 30 minutes, and then he came out, didn't take any questions, went to go sit down with House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, came out. Then he did talk briefly with members of the media, saying that he hasn't asked for anything yet. But reporting out of Crane's Chicago Business says that they're actually going to be looking for $1 billion in some kind of taxpayer assistance. That itself is also getting a lot of pushback. State Representative Kelly Cassidy telling members of the media that Reinsdorf needs to read the room. And the state doesn't have that type of money to help a wealthy ballpark franchise owner to be able to build a new stadium. So how that works into the next year budget, or is it going to be something that's spread out over, 30 years or so? That is yet to be seen. But between now and May 31st, Dan, we're going to see all these pieces come together in a large spending package. That's the largest spending package in state history at a taxpayer cost of about $54 billion. But Dan, just so people know, that's just the state spending. That doesn't include federal pass-through dollars.
Right.
And when you really look at the grand scheme of the total taxpayer costs to operate Illinois, both state and federal, you're looking at $170, $180, $190 billion. So most of that coming from the federal government, but of course state funds being from Illinois income taxes and sales taxes and a variety of other tax and fees. And all the things that are being paid for, the $10 billion for pensions, $10 billion for K through 12 education, major drivers of the state budget, all of these things included in that spending plan. We'll be watching it closely.
We have just a couple of minutes left, Greg. I want to talk to you about another proposal that's in the legislature. A new measure that was filed by State Rep Kelly Cassidy, a Democrat from Chicago, would provide a $500 tax credit for abortion providers, abortion seekers, legal guardians of abortion seekers, and public school teachers who moved to Illinois because of abortion restrictions in other states. Tell us about that and what's the reaction been to that?
Yeah, so this House Bill 5152, you've got State Representative Kelly Cassidy saying that she wants to offer up this incentive of sorts, saying on social media that Illinois wants to offer up a hand up for those fleeing from states that have banned access to abortion, but also maybe banning certain types of topics from being taught in schools. She said, in turn, these new residents will bring their talents and contributions to our community. She calls it a win-win. But the reaction coming from various groups that oppose easy access to abortion, Mark Dixon, he's with Sanctuary Cities for the Unborn, he says that this is an interesting twist because some states attract people for skiing, he said, or for good food or entertainment venues. But he told the Center Square that what this measure does seems to say, hey, come to Illinois for abortions. So clearly another interesting agenda item. In Planned Parenthood, they seem to be saying Illinois is a beacon for access to abortion, but the pushback from those who oppose easy access to abortion say this is the wrong step for Illinois to take.
Interesting, Greg. And as you noted up top, these are all just proposals right now, everything we've talked about. Nothing is for sure until the legislature passes and Governor Pritzker signs it. And the legislature will be working up into May. So we'll see what happens. And listeners can keep up with all of the goings on in our state capitol in Springfield at thecentersquare.com. We'll, of course, return every week to keep you informed about the ongoings at the Capitol on Illinois in Focus. But we are out of time. For Greg Bishop, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.